I'm here in beautiful Milwaukee, Wisconsin on the coast of Lake Michigan, and I thought it wouldn't be me if I didn't decide to review my rental car, which is a 2023 Ford Escape Active. Active meaning I have literally no clue. Ford probably wants you to think that it's active in the way that its owners are active, you know, the active type of go anywhere people. That's what crossovers are supposed to be marketed towards. But it's also active in some of the ways that it makes me absolutely angry, which we'll get to in a minute. This is the base level Ford Escape, the active trim level. Above it sits the ST line, and then there's the ST line Select. Go ahead, yeah, you can just drive by. Underneath the hood here, it houses a 1.5 liter EcoBoost 3-cylinder engine that is paired to an 8-speed automatic transmission, and it starts at just a hair under $30,000. So that puts it in direct competition with the Mazda CX-50, which I've also reviewed. Compared to the CX-50, it does have more equipment from a base level. You have a power liftgate around back and wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. We're gonna go at it from a standard boring review type standpoint where we go over practicality and technology and all the regular car buyer stuff. So let's start with the styling and then practicality. When it comes to any boring regular crossover for daily driver use that is in this price range, styling, yes, isn't the most important thing to buyers, but it's always important to me, so I'm going to go over it real quick. This Ford Escape is a facelifted version of the one that went before it, which had a much more ungainly, ugly front end. This one, they actually cleaned it up quite a bit, gave it more of a regular look. It's not polarizing like the one before. It has regular headlights, a regular grille that's sort of Audi shaped, but we'll forget about that. And there's these fake vent things that have a lot of styling and work put into them. I mean, they're all 3D and looks like that was quite complicated to make. And it's fake, again, clearly fake plastic. There's really nothing exciting or different about the way this car is styled, but I mention it because it's much better looking than the pre-facelift Ford Escape on which this is based. At least they cleaned it up a little bit, made it look more modern at the expense of it looking as boring as every other crossover on the road. There's nothing that interesting to it. Like I said, I mentioned those 3D weird fake vents because that's about it. There's nothing else. That's the most interesting part of this car's design right there. There is a shark fin antenna back there like BMW's, but it's also in plastic. Yeah, it's quite boring. Let's move to practicality. It says Escape proudly in bold lettering, which is very cool indeed. It really shows that Ford Escape pride. Down on the bottom it says Active. Still don't know what that means, but I'm sure angry people will enlighten me in the comments. And on the side you'll see this car is equipped with all-wheel drive, but it's the standard all-wheel drive. That's front-wheel drive every chance it can possibly be front-wheel drive, and then when it needs all-wheel drive, it absolutely needs it, it sends power to the back. So let's check out the practicality, which we can do by pressing the button underneath the proud, bold Escape logo, or we could just double-click the button on the key. And I'm sure it'll open eventually, or it'll just close again. Okay. Usually when you double press the button on the key, it also lifts it up electronically, but this time it didn't want to. We look inside and we see quite a boring, unconventional cargo area, but it's got plenty of space for a weekend away, anything that you really need, all your groceries. It's definitely large enough for most people. I wouldn't say that it's as big as the Mazda CX-50. I believe the CX-50 is a little bit deeper, maybe a bit wider, not as tall, but it's still definitely a very usable cargo area back here. But if you need more cargo area, you can drop the rear seats, but unfortunately you have to go to each side. The lever to actually release the seats is on the bottom corner of each seat, which is kind of annoying. That means you have to go to the passenger side and then around to the driver's side. There's no latches back here like in some cars, which is kind of annoying, but not really a big deal. That's what you get when you buy the base level Ford Escape. You have to do more walking. Once again, this tailgate right here lifted up electronically, but what I find kind of unorthodox and pretty annoying actually, is the fact that there's no lock button back here. Traditionally, on pretty much every modern car, there is at least a lock button so that when you close the trunk, it locks all the doors, locks the car. You'll actually see that a lot on cars that don't have power trunks and power lift gates. This car has the exact opposite of what you'd expect for a base level car. On a car like this, I would expect a lock button so that when I slam the lift gate closed, it locks the car. Not a big deal because you can always just lock the doors the traditional way with the key fob or touching the door. I just would expect at least a lock button on the tailgate so that when I press it, it will close and then lock the car. But for some reason, Ford forgot to put that button in. Here we are in the back seat of the Ford Escape Active. This seat right here is as far back as it will go, meaning it's in my driving position, which also means I am tall, 6'3". And from an adult's perspective back here, it's not too bad. I mean, my knees are touching the seat in front of me, but I can stretch out a little bit more. It's not uncomfortable. They're touching, but only barely. I have plenty of feet room and plenty of headroom. So maybe I could get a little bit more legroom back here, but it's honestly mostly for kids. So this is easily good enough for anybody. Also, you can adjust the seat. So if you want even less legroom, that's possible. Yeah, now I'm snug and comfy. That is nice that you can actually adjust the seat back here, and I think I'm gonna do that. In the center, there is a weirdly shaped center armrest with some pathetic looking cup holders, but at least they're deep, so they should hold drinks in just fine. But if you spill your Starbucks Frappuccino, you're gonna get it all over this lovely textured cloth back here, which is nicely stitched, and honestly, it's not super uncomfortable. These seats back here are quite flat, so I imagine after a while on a long road trip, they would start to hurt, but I think it's fine. The materials back here, there's a lot of plastic, not very nice looking, all the same color, even on the door handle here, but I mean, what can you honestly expect? I think the Mazda CX-50 has a nicer interior overall, nicer quality, nicer finishes, nicer everything, really, but the Ford Escape isn't that bad. It's not that far off, to be honest. Here we are up front in the Ford Escape Active, and this is where a lot of my complaints start to show, my real complaints. Chief among which is this infotainment system, which I am absolutely not a fan of, and I think it is complete, utter garbage. Total garbage. The reason why I say that is I have been living with this car for the past couple days, and most notably connecting to Apple CarPlay and navigating places and just using this infotainment in general has been a total nightmare. Picture the scene. You're coming up to an important junction. You need to know where you're turning. You're also listening to your music at the same time. And then the screen just goes black. You don't know where you're going. And then it goes back to the regular Ford Sync system and tells you Apple CarPlay is not available, so you miss your turn, you're late to your meeting, you're fired, you lose the house, you lose the wife and kids, and you are living underneath a bridge in a box for the rest of your miserable existence. This infotainment system is housed in a screen that is quite small and is just not good. It freezes, it's slow. Trying to use wireless Apple CarPlay, well, yes, it is very nice that it has wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, I might add. That is very nice indeed. It's just a complete nightmare. It freezes, it crashes, the music just gets all patchy like it's a bad CD or something like that. At least in my experience with this Apple CarPlay system in this car is just bad. Straight up bad, not sugarcoating it. I would take any infotainment system at all in front of this one. I think the best thing that you can possibly do with this system right here is go to Settings, Display, and hit that button. And all of your problems are away because the screen has turned off. In the center, there is a digital gauge cluster, which is very nice, and it's nicely configurable, but one problem I have with it is you can't do as much as I would like you to be able to do. Being me, I like to have a tachometer and I like to have a traditional speedometer in my gauge cluster because I like having all my information there. But I would also love to have my music available showing on the screen whilst I'm navigating somewhere, but I can't do that. You can go into this menu in the digital gauge cluster and tell it to show you your music, but instead of showing your music in the gauge cluster like you would expect, given that you're operating that setting in the gauge cluster itself, it just switches your navigation away and shows you your music. It's just irritating. And also the messages that this digital gauge cluster gives you is just so overbearing and ridiculous. For example, I will disengage the parking brake and it gives me a 5-second warning message that I disengaged the parking brake. Yes, I know. Then I will turn off the auto stop start system, and then it gives me another 5-second message that I can either wait the whole 5 seconds, which feels like an eternity, or press the OK button 3 times until it finally recognizes my input to make it go away. Literally everything you do in the car and in your life, it gives you a warning in the gauge cluster that takes forever to go away, and if you try to make it go away yourself, you're going to be pressing the button on the wheel. And a lot of this information in here is just not really useful. Like your vehicle maintenance, which to be fair, it is a Ford, so you're going to need to know about your maintenance a lot. Audio, again, switches the audio only on the center screen here, which I recommend keeping off. It is very nice that you can configure this gauge cluster. A lot of cars, especially at this price point, don't even give you that option or don't even give you a digital gauge cluster at all. This digital gauge cluster is definitely better than the one that's offered on the Mazda CX-50, which is basically not one at all. It's not very good. Also, Honda CR-V has a much less modern feeling infotainment and digital gauge cluster in general, but it's still kind of a pain. All the messages, all the issues that I've had with the infotainment has just driven me to the edge of reason the past couple days, and I cannot wait to go back to 190,000 mile old BMW that doesn't have any of this garbage. Moving towards quality, it's about the same as it is in the back seat, but it's a bit more styled. You've got this fake plastic aluminum trim to make it a little bit less monocolored up here, if that's even a word, you get what I'm saying. And down below the air vents, you have climate controls that are quite easy to use, and they are buttons, which is very nice. They're always there right where you need them, and I can't imagine what a nightmare it would have been if they put that in the sync system and made the sync system, which is already overworked clearly by being an infotainment system in the first place. It can't handle it. So putting the climate in there would have just completely ruined the entire experience of the car. Moving back, you have Ford's glorious rotary shift knob, which is not glorious at all, and I absolutely hate it. I hate every moment that I have to touch this little thing and then twist it to get the car into gear. What happened to just a traditional gear selector that you slotted into gear? What was wrong with that? I don't understand for the life of me why car companies think that they have to reinvent the shift knob. There was nothing wrong with it to begin with. And if you want a conventional shift lever that isn't stupid and an infotainment system that works and doesn't crash all the time but still offers Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, Mazda CX-50 is available for the same price. Underneath the hood here, you can see that there is quite a lot of extra room because that right there is a 1.5 liter turbocharged 3-cylinder engine. So it's very small, and you can tell because I can touch the transmission right here. It's just got a lot of extra room. So I imagine working on it isn't too bad, which you're gonna need because it's a Ford and Fords tend to explode. This engine makes 180 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 190 pound-feet of torque at 3,000 RPM, drives the front or all 4 wheels via an 8-speed automatic transmission, and has a towing capacity of 2,000 pounds, which is exactly the same as Mazda's CX-50, which has a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine. So in terms of towing capacity, this is quite impressive compared to the big boy Mazda engine, and it gets a lot better gas mileage than the 2.5 in the Mazda, but the Mazda makes a little bit more power. And when I mean a little bit, I mean a lawnmower's worth of extra power. It makes 187 horsepower and pretty much the same amount of torque. So this little engine is quite the fighter and quite the little powerhouse indeed. Now, I can't vouch for reliability compared to Mazda, but I would imagine, given Ford's reputation with its 3-cylinder EcoBoost and 4-cylinder EcoBoost engines, would look into a AAA membership for sure. Yeah. So here we are driving the 2023 Ford Escape Active, which normally would be followed by a groan and a sigh, because the Ford Escape is not a car for driving enjoyment. It's a car for driving every day to the grocery store and back to go pick up your kids from school, that kind of thing. But I have to say, this car actually doesn't drive too bad. It's got the typical crossover stuff where the steering has no weight to it, doesn't feel all that connected to the front wheels. But another thing is the steering is very quick in this car, almost too quick. Makes it feel a little bit more sporty than it actually is. The handling, while it isn't great, it's not bad either. It's about what you'd expect. It's got plenty of body roll and body lean through turns, but it's not dangerous or anything like that. And the ride quality isn't all that great either, but it's fine. And the roads around in Milwaukee are very bumpy and not that good. So we're really judging it in the most brutal of areas. I know this is supposed to be more of a consumer-oriented review because this is a consumer-oriented vehicle, but I gotta say, my favorite thing about this car is the sound that it makes. That 3-cylinder engine up front. 3-cylinder engines and 5-cylinder engines have this inherent raspiness to it, and this car just makes the most hilarious raspy 3-cylinder noises. It sounds like it's fueled by bees. It makes such a good sound. For a crossover, you wouldn't expect it to sound good at all. I mean, that's not the point. And if anything, a lot of them are going to be noisy and drony when you put your foot down. But this, it's fun to drive. It's genuinely an enjoyable to drive car. And that's just because of the 3-cylinder noises up there. This car is more fun to drive and more engaging than a Mazda CX-50. It just is. It makes better sound. It feels faster, honestly. Maybe that's just because you wouldn't expect it to be fast given it's a 3-cylinder. So if I had to choose between the two based off of just driving enjoyment, Ford Escape all day, every day. And if I had to choose between the two based off of standard equipment, then I'd choose the Ford Escape as well. I mean, this not only has power liftgate, which the Mazda CX-50 doesn't have at the base price level, this also has a heated steering wheel standard. Again, Mazda CX-50 doesn't offer that on the base level. It has wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is terrible and barely works. It also has a nice gauge cluster screen. It has parking sensors. It's got all these different drive modes. It's definitely better equipped from a starting level than the CX-50 is. But I don't know, that 3-cylinder up there, Ford doesn't really have the best reputation for reliability with their 3-cylinder EcoBoost engines. So I wouldn't trust it to last as long as the Mazda. It makes such great noises, which you're going to have to listen to the engine a lot because the Apple CarPlay, while it's playing your music, is just going to freeze for no reason, and it's going to get all patchy, and that's going to be very annoying. And all of these messages in the gauge cluster are so irritating. There's even one that when you turn the car off, it reminds you to check your rear seat for your rear seat occupants, because I guess Ford believes that the standard Ford Escape owner forgets that they have children, so they turn off the car and lock their kids in a hot car on a summer afternoon while they go into the grocery store. It reminds you to check the rear seats every time you turn off the car, and it's accompanied by another annoying bonging sound. It goes boom, boom, and it goes, check your rear seat, and I go, there's nobody back there. Stop reminding me. I think where this car shines is where it doesn't really need to shine, which is driving enjoyment, but it's at least nice that it has that going for it. And I think where this car completely falls on its face is everything that's actually important to buyers, which is infotainment, reliability, everything. But again, it's very well equipped for $30,000. With that, I'm gonna end the video there. Like, subscribe, do all the normal YouTube stuff. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye. Underneath the hood here, we have, I'm used to hood struts in the cars I review. All right, let's just do that. There we go.